야제 전부도 님이죠. 너는 뭐는 전부 나게다 나그러다 간산도 셔마도 tum바도 제잔라 기숑서 내셔로 저기 장감서 저거 뒤집션로 열라는 지금 반조자라 소라 공주 도반보르 신지로 공주 도반보르 신지로 공주 도반보르 신지로
Profound and subtle Dharma is rarely encountered in eons. Now we hear and follow it. May we realize the Tathagata's meaning. To liberate beings, please generate bodhicitta before teaching.
Right now, in our study of the Shurangama Sutra, we already discussed the 6 entrances, and now we're talking about the 12 sense bases. Among the 12 sense bases, we've already finished discussing the eye sense base and the form sense base. Then we've also completed the discussion on the ear sense base. The ear faculty and the sound sense base. Next, the nose sense base, the nose faculty and the smell sense base. These 6 sense bases have already been covered earlier, so today we'll continue with the tongue faculty. We'll be discussing the tongue faculty and the taste sense base, these 2 topics. As we all know, when it comes to the 12 sense bases, there are the 6 sense faculties and the 6 sense objects, namely. So in total, there are 12 sense bases. Now regarding these 12 sense bases, after having discussed so much earlier, now let's continue as we proceed. The Buddha then told Ananda, saying the following words: "You regularly, at 2 times, hold the alms bowl among the assembly." Here, at this moment, he is speaking to Ananda. Next, we will begin discussing the tongue faculty. We'll talk about the tongue faculty itself and the external taste object, which is called the taste dust, these 2 aspects. Before discussing these 2, we first need to introduce a metaphor. You could say that this is actually also a kind of metaphor. It also puts Ananda in the role of the main character, or rather, as the central figure who is being addressed here. You, during those 2 regular times of the day, specifically the 2 times refer to both the morning and the noon periods. Generally for monastics, they do not eat afternoon. They eat once in the morning and then again at noon, and when eating they hold the alms bowl and go among the lay followers to receive offerings. Everyone knows about the practice of going on alms rounds with the bowl. So you are always acting as a monastic. In the mornings and at noon you go into the city to receive alms carrying your bowl. During this time you might come across ghee or refined butter, which are considered the finest flavors. During this process, as you go on your alms round, you may encounter ghee and clarified butter. Actually, ghee, cheese, and clarified butter. These terms, this metaphor, also appears in the Nirvana Sutra. Generally, it starts with a cow. After you have a cow, you get milk. Once you have milk, by churning it, you can make cheese. This cheese is a kind of curd. Actually, there are 2 types of curd, raw and cooked. There are 2 kinds of cheese. If you continue to process this cheese further, what is it called? It's called clarified butter. Actually, as for clarified butter, cheese is basically what we now call milk residue in Tibetan regions. They're quite similar. When we have breakfast, we often use that milk residue. Because after churning yak milk, one part that is extracted is called cheese and another part is called butter. Then this butter is usually melted again in Tibetan areas. When it's melted again, a considerable amount of the residue is left behind inside. Then what remains is the relatively pure. It is an almost nectar-like rich and creamy butter soup. If you let this delicious butter soup solidify again, this can also be called a kind of clarified butter. So usually, for example, when we make offerings, some people use butter soup and ginseng fruit together. And if you eat these 2 together, then this is truly the most delicious and absolutely finest delicacy in the entire world. Generally speaking, it's still very much like this in Tibetan region today. It seems that some young people aren't very interested in butter and ginseng fruit. If you stir-fry some cabbage or lettuce for them instead, they get much more interested. But generally, the older or elderly people, if you give them some barley or something like that, along with a bowl of butter soup and ginseng fruit, they'll be very happy. Moreover, even for holding important major ceremonies, these are the kinds of foods that are typically used. This is considered to be the very finest kind of food available. So, at that particular time, the Buddha actually also made use of this special milk cream. As for milk cream, the Nirvana Sutra says that it can cure a wide variety of illnesses, for example, things like rheumatism, as well as many other diseases. But you probably shouldn't eat too much butter. If you eat too much, it can actually cause fatty liver disease and really isn't very good for your overall health at all. And then, especially in the winter months, eating a little butter with tsampa is good. But nowadays, butter is getting more and more expensive. Some people might not even be able to afford it. As for cheese curds, in Sertar it's over 40 yuan per jin. I'm not sure about the price of butter here. It should be 30 or 40. How much is it? Huh? The Dharma assembly price is 28. That's really good. It's over 50 degrees outside. Did you purchase any? 8 jin? 8 jin and a half? Eating that much every day? How do you feel? How do you feel? It's okay? Let me see. You look very thin. Maybe it's not that good. Is that so? Okay, that's right. How about tsampa? Do you eat tsampa? Strong tea. What about rice?
Having rice for lunch? How about breakfast?
Tibetan food for breakfast, Chinese food for lunch, and nothing for dinner. I see, that's not bad. All right, this is about butter. So let me ask you, as for the butter, you said it's really delicious, very tasty indeed. So let me ask you, this particular sense of tasty, does it come from the air? Or does it come from the tongue or from the food itself? It is called the supreme taste. What do you think? Does this taste arise from the air? Is it from the tongue itself, or is it actually from the food? The Buddha asked Ananda, you say this is especially delicious clarified butter, this wonderful nectar. Do you think it tastes so incredibly good, that truly wonderful flavor on your tongue? Does this delicious sensation arise from empty space, or does it actually come from the tongue itself? You need to contemplate this. You need to tell me. Does it arise from the tongue, or does it arise from the food? Then the Buddha said to Ananda, if this taste arises from your tongue, there is only one tongue in your mouth, and therefore your tongue should always taste like clarified butter. Furthermore, when you encounter black rock honey, the taste of your tongue should not change at all, he said. If Ananda answered that, this delicious taste should arise from the tongue, because without it you wouldn't be able to taste anything, right? If that's truly the case, then you already know for certain that there is only one tongue inside your mouth, with just a single tongue. At that moment, your tongue would have already become, what would it have turned into? The taste of ghee or clarified butter, because it's the tongue that tastes. If the tongue tastes, then at that very moment, you would have essentially become like that. So, in that case, if you then encounter something called black rock honey is said to be made from certain kinds of sugar cane. It's basically a type of sugar. In Tibetan, it's referred to as rock sugar. It's translated as rock sugar, gara. First you eat ghee or clarified butter, then you eat rock sugar, and then candy. So in this case, wouldn't it be that the taste you previously experienced has turned into the taste of sugar? If it doesn't shift or change, if it doesn't transform, then you wouldn't recognize the taste. If it doesn't shift to the taste of sugar, if it really doesn't change at all. then it will always be tasting the flavor of ghee. It would never know the sweetness of sugarcane or black rock honey. It wouldn't know sweetness, something like that. If it does change, if you say that, I ate ghee before, and then when I ate black rock honey, my sense of taste had already shifted. If it changes, as everyone knows, this sense of taste relies on the tongue faculty to perceive it. The tongue faculty doesn't have multiple bodies, because a person only has one tongue. It's impossible to have two tongues like a venomous snake actually does. That's why, in rhetoric, a venomous snake is called two-tongued. People who like to speak divisive words can also be called two-tongued. However, in reality, in fact, whether it's a human or an animal such as a cow, most sentient beings in general have only one tongue faculty. So how can a single tongue faculty taste so many different flavors? How can one tongue know many tastes? In other words, if you say it actually changes in some way, basically, then such a change is impossible because you only have one tongue faculty. With just one tongue faculty, how could you possibly perceive or taste so many different flavors? First the taste of butter, and then later the taste of black rock honey. This is impossible. Everyone should be aware of this as well. Yesterday, when we were carefully refuting each individual point, we all really needed to fully understand this. For example, when we refuted sound yesterday, actually, when a sound is transmitted through the air, whether it's the sound of a drum being struck or the clear ringing of a bell, if it truly has no inherent nature of its own, then at the same time Ananda can hear it, and so can Kashyapa, and so can Madhgalyayana. All 1,250 bhikshus can also hear it. But if this particular sound truly, in and of itself, had an inherent nature, then this sound, once it entered Ananda's ear faculty, no one else would be able to hear it at all. In the same way, the same principle applies here. It's taste, among form, sound, smell, and taste, the delicious flavor from outside. If it had a truly inherent and unchanging nature, then when you receive it with a single tongue, it would always and forever be received by the tongue. But if it were to change again, at the very first instant in time, I experienced the delicious and rich taste of clarified butter, and then in the very next instant, if I happen to experience, say, the flavor of black honey, then the previous taste no longer has an inherent nature. It has already become impermanent. And then when I experience another taste after that, it is yet another flavor. Such flavors, in reality, have no inherent nature. They change according to conditions. Any phenomenon that changes with conditions is just like air, clouds, or a mirage. It has no inherent nature. So when we study the Shurangama Sutra, we must understand that it is about refuting the existence of truly inherent phenomena. This is important from beginning to end. Otherwise, I notice that when some great masters give teachings, it seems even they themselves feel that their words lack a certain persuasiveness. Why is that? Because in our direct experience, there can be so many things. You see, you can see so many colors, white, red, green, all kinds of colors, and you can also hear all kinds of pleasant and unpleasant sounds as well, which can include various types of noises. Then, when it comes to the nose and smelling, you can smell both fragrances and foul odors. So in that case, why is it that when the Buddha was refuting this to Ananda, he said that if one possesses it, the other cannot? I mentioned the reason for this earlier as well. It's only when we carefully study the ornament of the middle way that we truly come to understand that sentient beings' attachment is singular, permanent, and holistic. So, our attachment is actually like this, but in reality the true nature of all phenomena, in fact, is not like this. If it were not so, then it would be false and would not correspond to our attachment. If it does not correspond to our attachment, it means its inherent nature cannot be established. This issue is also, as a matter of fact, of great importance here. Yesterday, during our speaking quiz, a Dharma friend said, "I don't understand why we can't just listen to a bit more. Isn't it possible to listen to more?" Of course, maybe they were pretending not to know, otherwise this theory was actually already explained earlier. When we discuss the sixth sense basis, we must understand this. If we do, we will know the Buddha did not refute the existence of form, sound, smell, taste, and touch in our conventional world. He did not refute them. The Buddha did not refute them either, nor did he refute our current eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. We experience the 6 external objects as if in a dream or illusion, and then the 6 consciousnesses arise. None of this has been refuted, not at all. This has not been refuted in any context, but what has been refuted? For example, in the Shravakayana, things are considered to be truly existent. They strongly believe in the real existence of things. These truly existent things, if we refute them in this way, then it becomes very easy. So even during the empowerment ceremony, there are delicious and unpalatable foods, and when we eat them at that time, actually whether we eat butter, whether it's Tibetan food or Han food, when it's time to eat, you really shouldn't just keep thinking, oh, this is so delicious. You haven't really examined what exactly makes it good. Is it coming from your tongue, or is it coming from the butter itself, or does it arise somewhere in between, in the space between? When you look at it this way, even though I like eating butter, maybe if I just keep eating and eat up to a full 8 gin, then in the end I'll probably have a new feeling about it. Now let's talk about this. If the delicious taste arises from the faculty of the tongue, then it's already been broken. But maybe most people wouldn't think it comes from the faculty of my tongue. You probably wouldn't, right? If you think it comes from the food itself, that's what most people would think. This butter is delicious. The deliciousness comes from the butter itself. But actually, that's not reasonable either. Why isn't it reasonable? If it arises from the food, food itself has no consciousness, so how could it know taste? If you say it's from the butter, or that it comes from the food itself, in fact, food has no inherent consciousness at all. It doesn't have the ability to distinguish things. So how could it know what is delicious? You just said that this deliciousness comes from the food itself. If it really comes from the food, this deliciousness itself, it should have a complete system of its own. It shouldn't rely on other phenomena. It should be able to distinguish on its own. But food has no consciousness. This butter definitely has no consciousness. Otherwise, if you ate this butter, it would be considered killing a living being, which is definitely not the case. If eating butter were to break the 8 precepts, that would be even more troublesome. How could it possibly know taste? If food could know taste itself, it would be just the same as someone else eating it. What does it have to do with your so-called knowledge of taste, as you claim? If you say that this food isn't actually known by me at all, and that it knows its own deliciousness, then it's just like someone else experiencing it. If the food itself knows it's delicious, it's like another person eating 8 pounds of butter. What does that have to do with you? Whether he eats 8 pounds of butter or 5 pounds of butter, what does that even have to do with you? It really has nothing to do with you. So actually, it truly has nothing to do with you. Because if the butter knows itself to be delicious, if that's the case, it's just like when someone else is the one tasting the butter instead of you. In that case, Ananda, what does it really have to do with you? The connection between you and the delicious food, there's nothing left at all. This is an observation made from 2 different perspectives. So for us as well, regardless of whether we eat butter or not, where does true deliciousness actually come from? In fact, this is also a kind of direct pointing method in Vajrayana practice. Whether you find something tasty or you feel that it tastes bad, is this actually produced by the tongue, or is it produced by the food itself, or does it arise from somewhere in the air? Perhaps the final conclusion is that in the conventional world, without any investigation, the conditions of delicious butter and the conditions of the tongue and the involvement of the mind that wants to eat it, when these 3 conditions are all present, only then does the sensation of deliciousness arise. But this is unreliable. Anything that arises from conditions is illusory. Illusory phenomena do not truly exist. But actually, within illusion, illusory phenomena can be established. None of us would refute this. Just as Mipham Rinpoche says in his Madhyamaka teachings, no Madhyamika who refutes appearances exists, nor is there any Madhyamika who asserts inherent existence. No one would hold such a view. A true Madhyamika would not refute the appearances of seeing, hearing, or knowing, but would also not establish any phenomenon as inherently existent, because in ultimate reality, it simply cannot be identified or located. If it arises within emptiness, now regarding the third aspect, you say this delicious taste, the delicious taste of eating butter, is neither in the tongue nor in the food itself. If it should arise in emptiness, then when you eat emptiness, what flavor would it have? Why don't you try experiencing emptiness for yourself? Just eat some emptiness and see what it's like. Since you claim that deliciousness appears in emptiness, in that case, you would be like a hungry ghost wandering in space, eating emptiness. See how it feels and what kind of taste it has. If emptiness itself stretching out before us were salty, then not only your tongue but your whole face would taste salty as well. Then everyone in this world would be like fish in the sea. Maybe it would be better if there were a comma here. Constantly tasting salt, never really knowing what blandness is. What he's saying here is, if you want to know what it might be like to taste the flavor of emptiness, and if we imagine that emptiness could actually have a flavor, let's suppose that this flavor is salty, just like the saltiness when we eat salt. Then in that case, this salty taste would already be something on your tongue. Because as long as it's salty, without a doubt, my tongue will definitely be the one to taste it. So in this case, because of this saltiness, the saltiness comes from emptiness itself. If it comes from emptiness, then this saltiness could also be felt on your face. Because emptiness, my face can also come into contact with it, and so can my body. So in that case, I am a sentient being living within emptiness. And as a result, I am residing truly within saltiness. Everything completely exists within saltiness. So in this way, everyone in this world is just like fish living in salty water. If you constantly experience this saltiness, then you'll never be able to taste blandness. Blandness means there's hardly any flavor. We usually say it's bland, 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 just really bland. And in the end, if there's nothing at all, that's called blandness. As mentioned earlier, in this case, as you may recall, what I just described is a kind of theoretical reasoning, you know? Sometimes the other person really doesn't even want to admit it at all, but they end up using reasoning, and in the end, they have no choice but to admit it themselves. Because if you say, I want to taste emptiness, if you want to taste it, then emptiness must have a flavor. Otherwise, how would you taste it? If you say it has a flavor, then it's either sweet or salty, or it's spicy, astringent, and so on. If it's one of these, if you say it's salty, then when emptiness comes into contact with you in other ways, it's just like your tongue coming into contact with emptiness, then your whole body should also be in contact with emptiness. In that case, your whole body would be surrounded by this salty taste. And not just you in that case. All living beings that exist within the boundless emptiness, all sentient beings contained within emptiness would be just like fish in the ocean. All would be surrounded by a salty taste. In that case, everyone who comes into contact with emptiness would have a salty taste. We wouldn't need to buy salt. And if more people accepted emptiness, it would be especially salty, and it would feel quite unpleasant. But in that particular case, you would never actually be able to taste anything that is mild. If you do not know what mild tastes like, you simply will not notice the saltiness either. If you don't have the experience of a mild flavor, mildness and saltiness are actually relative to each other. If there is no such thing as a mild taste, then in fact, salty, sweet, and spicy flavors wouldn't exist either, because existence and non-existence are mutually opposed and relative to each other. So in that case, if you say something is mild, and you say you absolutely can't accept a mild taste, that too is relative to it. Just like if there were no darkness, then light couldn't exist either. Light and darkness are also relative to each other. So if there is no mild taste, then a salty taste couldn't exist either. If there is nothing to know, how could there be such a thing as taste? So in that case, there would be neither mild nor salty flavors. Then all the flavors you've ever tasted would simply be gone. You would know absolutely nothing at all. And if you truly know nothing at all, how can you possibly claim that you've experienced it? Earlier, Ananda might have thought that he was very happy after eating the ghee. But in the end, after all the back and forth, if you had 8 jin of ghee and there was no taste at all, you would actually be quite miserable. After you got home, you would just throw it away. So now, either you have to say that there should definitely be a good, pleasant flavor present, but if you really can't describe it, then it becomes a bit troublesome. Therefore, you should know clearly that taste, the tongue, and the act of tasting all have no fixed or permanent place. So what should we do? What is the conclusion we should ultimately reach? Taste, that is, the sense of the tongue and the process of tasting. Sometimes these are observed from 2 different perspectives. Here, it's the flavor, then the tongue faculty, and also using the tongue to taste, the way of receiving or experiencing taste with the tongue. And these 3 things actually have no fixed location. The faculty of the tongue also does not have a fixed location, and the external taste objects also do not have a fixed or permanent location. Since both the tongue and taste have no fixed place, then actually tasting it is also truly unattainable. We also cannot obtain form. Form objects are also unattainable. If the faculty of the eye is also unattainable, then seeing is impossible, and sound objects are also unattainable. If the faculty of the ear is also unattainable, then hearing in between is also in fact completely impossible. Then the faculty of the nose also does not exist at all, essentially. And if the external fragrance objects also do not exist, then smelling is also impossible. It is the same principle at work here. That is to say, both tasting and the experience of taste, these 2 are illusory and neither produced by causes and conditions nor by inherent nature. They are not generated by causes and conditions, nor do they exist inherently and eternally by nature. Then what are they? Within the wondrous true suchness mind of the Tathagatagarbha, they manifest as undying, like a dream or an illusion. In reality, this is a kind of wondrous power and also a marvelous function. So what exactly is it that we taste? Actually, it is within the essential wondrous function of the Tathagatagarbha. It is also just a kind of manifested appearance, a mere display. In the entering the way of the great vehicle, everyone has studied this quite clearly as well. Whether it is from beings in hell all the way up to the Buddha himself, there is a commonly manifested, permitted realm of existence. When this manifested, permitted realm is pure, it transforms into wisdom. Pure wisdom. When it is not pure, it becomes the experiences of sentient beings in the 6 realms. Everyone should absolutely be clear about this as well. So, what are we talking about here? Just now we discussed taste and the tongue faculty. Next, let's talk about the body faculty and touch. Yes, sure, let's discuss this principle now. So, the Buddha told Ananda, you often rub your head with your hand every morning. The Buddha told Ananda at this point in the teaching, next is the body faculty. The body faculty and the external sense object of touch must be discerned as truly empty in nature. This is the way to point it out. In this way, first it is also to let Ananda, now Ananda says nothing at all, just keeps waiting, as if he has fallen asleep, without even the slightest response. Originally, after the explanation of the 6 sense entrances, he really should have acknowledged it, but even after the 12 sense bases were thoroughly explained, he still said absolutely nothing at all. The Buddha kept on speaking in this way. Here he says, you often in the early morning. In the morning, rub your head with your hand. It was mentioned earlier as well that monastics, when rubbing the head with the hand, actually in hand region, for example, in the pure precepts of Chan Master Baizhang, it is also clearly stated that monastics should rub their heads 3 times a day. Especially in the morning, they should rub their heads 3 times. So what does it mean to rub the head 3 times? One should rub one's own head and reflect, reminding oneself that you are a disciple of the Buddha and take the precepts as your teacher. Also, make it a regular practice to use the 4 foundations of mindfulness in this way. Previously, in the Dream Roaming collection of Elder Han Shan, it was also mentioned that monastics should often rub their heads 3 times, then, with right knowledge and right mindfulness, contemplate and practice. Generally speaking, this is also a kind of practice for monastics. When you get up in the morning, each and every day indeed. Why is it done this way? Just think for yourself. Touch your head. After touching your head, you realize you have no hair now. You are already different from worldly people. Worldly people have hair on their heads, but I have none at all. So if I have no hair, it's because I willingly shave my head. It's not like some people who are forced to do it. For example, some people in prison, the prison guards forcibly shave off all of the prisoners' hair. When some people are getting their hair cut, even a small piece of skin above their ear can sometimes get cut off as well. But that's not the case here. We shave our heads willingly, of our own accord. After shaving our heads, we officially become monastics, but if we still can't let go of the 8 worldly concerns, it's truly, truly shameful. So this is also a kind of practice. In this case, it's a kind of action. But the main point here isn't about the precepts. At that particular time, he must have really had a certain feeling. Each of us, some lay people can also try touching their heads. So everyone, please touch your head and see what it feels or seems like. Touch your own head, whether you have hair or not. Just touch it first. What is that sensation like for you? Is there a sensation? And this sensation, what he's mainly talking about here is, what do you think about this? How do you feel about it? When you touch your head, what exactly are you thinking about? When you feel that touch, who is actually experiencing it? So when you touch your head, there is a sense of conscious awareness. So this awareness, who is actually experiencing the sensation? When I touch my head, there is a certain feeling. Maybe it's a bit rough to the touch, or maybe it's actually kind of smooth, that particular sort of sensation. So what precisely is this awareness? This is a kind of perception, an awareness at the moment of contact. Where is this awareness of contact? What is it like? Is it in the hand or is it in the head? Is this awareness in the hand? Is it on the hand or is it on the head? This, for everyone, is actually a kind of direct pointing method. When you touch your head, in the process where your hand and head make contact, there is a kind of awareness that arises. This awareness, let me ask you, is it actually on your head or is it on your hand? Ask yourself honestly, where exactly is it? Where is it? Both places, right? What do you think? Have you touched it yet? Where is it? It surely is contact between the head and the hand, but is the sensation on the head or the hand? This is your own feeling. Okay. She doesn't even actually dare to say. It's one's own. Where is this feeling? Is it on the head or is it on the hand? It's all illusory. A bit clever. Now let's start to break it down. So he doesn't answer directly. It's all illusory, right? Okay. If it's on the hand, if this feeling is on the hand, then in that case, the head would be unaware, because you simply can't have 2 sensations at once. There's only one. If there's only one, if this feeling is actually on the hand, perhaps then the head would have no sensation. How could there be contact? Then the head wouldn't have any contact at all. The reason for the lack of sensation is gone. If it's on the head, if you say this feeling is on the head, if this feeling is on the head, then the hand would be useless. In that case, rubbing your head would be pointless. How could that be called contact? Because this feeling is actually, after all, originally on the head anyway. If it's on the head, even if you don't rub it with your hand, it's still there. So honestly, why even bother rubbing it at this point? Your head itself is always there too. The sensation is on the head. So in that case, why would you need to rub it? You could just not rub it at all. Then how could it be considered a sensation from your hand making contact? It shouldn't be said that way. If each has its own, if you say that, as some people just said, the hand has sensation and so does the head. If both have sensation, if both have it, then Ananda, you should have two bodies. You see, just now you said both have it. Now in this scenario, you would end up having two bodies. Because we have one consciousness and one body. If you could truly feel both at the same time, then that sensation would be a kind of discriminating thought. Within the continuity of a single person, it's impossible to generate two separate discriminating thoughts. If two discriminating thoughts were generated, then there would be two bodies, two streams of consciousness. At the same moment, this is the sensation of the hand. This is in a non-discriminating state. You can have all, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body. All can exist at the same time. But discriminating thoughts cannot produce two at once. If you follow the discriminating thought of the hand, or follow the discriminating thought of the head, then you definitely have two streams of continuity. Otherwise, it's impossible to have that. If the sensation arises from the contact between the head and the hand, then the hand and the head would have to be one entity. If you say that during the process when my head and hand come into contact, there is only one single contact, only one unique sensation, then in that case, since there is only one sensation, in this case, the hand and the head would become one entity. Why is that? Because if these are, in other words, two separate entities, it shouldn't be possible to have just one sensation. If the two still haven't merged into one yet, then it's impossible for it to become just one. So it must have become one entity. If they are one entity, then contact cannot be established. If you say the hand and the head are one entity, then contact would be impossible. For contact to occur, there must be two phenomena. It's impossible for something to contact itself. There must be an A phenomenon and a B phenomenon. Only A and B phenomena can make contact. If we say my hand touches my head, then the hand is one object and the head is another object. These two objects can come into contact with each other. This is what we call contact. If it's just one object, how could it touch itself? That's impossible. It's just like how a fingernail simply can't touch itself no matter what. It's truly impossible. So, as you just said a moment ago, if contact is only one thing, then the hand and the head would become one entity. If you say they are one entity, then contact cannot be established. If there are two entities, if you say that it really depends on the hand and it also depends on the head, if there are two natures, then where exactly is the contact? Just now you mentioned two different parts of the body. One is the hand, the other is the head, two limbs. If there are two limbs, then this sensation of contact, is it on the hand or on the head? Where exactly is it? If it's on the active side, it's not on the passive side. If it's on the passive side, it's not on the active side. Here, if it is on the active side, for example, our hand is the one that can make contact, and the head is the one actually being contacted. If this particular sensation is on the active side, that is, if it is specifically on my hand, then it definitely isn't on the passive side. It isn't the one being contacted. In that case, it has absolutely nothing to do with the head at all. However, if the contact is actually on the passive side and specifically on the head, if it is on the head being contacted, then it is not on the active side. It is not the function of making contact. In that case, it couldn't possibly be on the hand. Through this kind of analysis, what we call the sense of touch, indeed, when you haven't examined it, it feels like there's a subtle sensation when you touch your head. But when you actually use this kind of reasoning to carefully investigate, in fact, the sense of contact is truly illusory and unattainable. Just now, she kept avoiding giving a direct answer, but actually, she does understand a bit, right? Contact cannot be established between emptiness and you. So in this case, because you can't find it on the active side either, and on the passive side, you also can't get that sensation of touch, it's not accurate to say emptiness is making contact with you, because if nothing exists, it's basically the same as touching empty space. But you can't say that you're making contact with emptiness, Ananda, when your hand is rubbing your head. You feel that sensation of touch. When you haven't examined it, there really is a sensation. But when you finally investigate it, it's just like touching empty space. But when you touch empty space, there's nothing to actually touch. That's impossible. You shouldn't say that emptiness is what you're touching. Therefore, you should know that sensation, contact, and the body all have no real location. So you should understand in this context that touch is essentially the dust of the object. And the body is the dust of the sense organ of the body. And then the sensation is the feeling you have at the moment of contact. These three actually have no faculty, no real contact. In this way, both the body and contact, here contact refers to the body physically coming into contact with any particular object of the Dharma, which is called contact. Sometimes when we talk about the 6 sense bases, form, sound, smell, and taste are all relatively easy to understand. As for touch, anything that the body comes into contact with, anything at all can be included. It can be sentient things or insentient things. Whatever the object of contact is, that's called touch. And if this touch produces a feeling, that's called sensation. This is explained quite clearly here. Sometimes I myself, when I first started studying the Abhidharmakosha and Gateway to Knowledge, the concept of touch was a bit hard to understand. The others, form, sound, smell, and taste. These are all relatively fixed. Each sense base receives its own object, but the relationship between touch and sensation is a bit... It seems that sometimes touch is also a kind of feeling, but that's what is known as tactile sensation, which refers to our ability to perceive touch, just like our sense of taste or our sense of vision or even the sense of tasting. It's really just like that in a very similar way. So this seems a little... The distinction between sensation and touch is a bit hard to grasp. Everyone should be clear about this. So in that case, both the body and touch are ultimately illusory. So the body and touch, in reality, are also illusory and conventional. They are neither caused by conditions nor by inherent nature. They do not arise from causes, non-causes, nature, or non-nature. Apart from being a wondrous function of the Tathagatagarbha, there is nothing that truly exists. It's not that there is absolutely nothing either. It only manifests as an illusory, dreamlike appearance. That's all for today's lesson.
Bandara Badma Sodargye Bandara Badma Sodargye Bandara Badma Sodargye